Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick video about Sony's latest announcement of the a7R IIIa and a7R IVa. Now, you heard right, this sounds like a refresh, and when I initially got the press release from Sony, I scratched my head and wondered if this was some form of late April Fool's joke. But it is real, and essentially, in my opinion, it reflects supply and demand manufacturing process evolving to cope with the pandemic. Now, no one from Sony has told me that, but I really can't see any other reason for what they've done with this, dare I call it, a refresh. So basically, these new A models amount to the following. The LCD on the rear of the camera, I almost said display, has moved from the original 1.44 million dot panel to a 2.3 plus million dot panel. They've also dropped the Sony logo from the bottom of the LCD display, and then the USB Type-C port has been upgraded to a 3.4. 3.2. It would be nice if 3.4 existed, right? A 3.2 port. So higher throughput from the Type-C port, as well as higher resolution on the LCD screen. They've also stated that battery life will be slightly different. If I had to guess why, well, it's pretty obvious. If you up the resolution of the display and up the throughput of the Type-C port, ultimately those things, I think, have to take or create some form of hit on the Type-Z battery, which obviously has not changed. So again, to be clear, these new cameras are not really new. They just have an upgraded display as well as Type-C port and a little bit less, I'm presuming, battery life. And if you're wondering, again, why this would happen, keep in mind that the display appears to be, from what I've read, the exact same one that's on the A1, that is Sony's top-of-the-line full-frame mirrorless camera. I am still waiting to get my hands on that to share with all of you. Hopefully, Sony will get that to me soon. After all, you know, it's been a couple months since it was announced, and yeah, it's just a really exciting do-everything camera that I would love to be able to demo and, of course, share with all of you. And the same speaks to the throughput of the USB port, the Type-C port. So it seems to me that, in all likelihood, the parts used that are existing on the a7R III and IV in those two categories, again, the Type-C port and LCD display, probably ran dry. And as a result, it actually is more cost-effective for them to manufacture it with the newer parts that are already in the pipeline from the A1. Now, this is purely a guess, speculation on my part, but it makes sense. I mean, we are still going through a pandemic. There are still incredible supply shortages on all different fronts. And Sony, if you know anything about their bodies, generally does not retire them until they really have to. So, which I think is very smart for both end users like all of you out there and myself, as well as for Sony as a corporation trying to, of course, make a profit. Because basically what that amounts to is that as bodies get older, they don't discontinue them. They keep manufacturing them as long as the demand is there, and they can still supply the parts. They just lower the price, and that eventually, of course, just creates different price points along the pyramid until you get to the top, which presently is the A1 at $6,500 US. So that's what I think is going on here, and it makes sense. So if all of a sudden they, again, have a shortage on the old LCD screens and the Type-C ports from whatever vendors they supply those parts from, they don't want to stop manufacturing a7R IIIs and a7R IVs, so this was what they could do. Now, if the supply channels come back again, which I presume they will, then that would be the reason that, of course, they could go back to producing more a7R IIIs and a7R IVs. In the same vein, if those supply channels don't return because they've come out with models with new literal naming, with the A being added to each model, they don't have to worry about it. So I think it's a win-win for both consumers and Sony alike. Would I have liked this to have been a really tangible refresh? Sure. I mean, it also reminds me of when the RX 100 Mark V got, an A model, but that was not the same. I feel like, that was clearly a response to end users wanting a different camera than what had been presented in the original Mark V. And, here it seems to be clearly, again, this is only my opinion, a product of manufacturing costs and supply constraints, and how do we manage this without confusing consumers too much. And that's what I think it really does. And again, if Sony didn't continue to manufacture their bodies as long as they do, because a lot of manufacturers don't do that, I don't think they would have this issue. Some people would say, well, I'm surprised they're even still making the a7R III. But you have to remember the reason they are is because it's still an incredibly competent, very powerful camera. Of course, the same can be said about the a7R IV. Nothing has come out to replace it. We do have the A1, but that's another category altogether. So clearly Sony is preparing for the future, and this is a reaction to what's presently going on in the supply side of their manufacturing process. But hopefully that clears things up. Again, I know it wasn't easy to even see my a7R IV here inside the UU rig cage, the grip, the lens, the shotgun mic, the Viper arm for the monitor, but I just wanted to clear the air on this so that anyone who is curious, because I was curious what was going on, now you know what the a7R IIIa and a7R IVa are all about. It's really Sony staying nimble and on their toes with the manufacturing process and making sure that consumers aren't left high and dry, that aren't running out to buy the A1, that are still looking for the a7R III and the a7R IV, when I'm assuming the current inventory runs dry. So that seems to be it. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe, and please stay safe. Later.